Okay, well, this is my first time doing a wee talk, so forgive any silences or ums and ahs. So my name is Alex Cameron-Smith. I'm a Climate Resilience Manager at Sniffer. I'm going to talk about climate change impacts just in Scotland overall, who is most vulnerable to climate change, and then focus on a bit about what we can do about this together. So Sniffer is an environmental charity. We've got offices in Edinburgh and Glasgow, and we work with different people and places across Scotland. We focus on transformational programmes that we hope will create a fairer future for all. We deliver the Adaptation Scotland programme for Scottish Government, which is looking at adaptation on a national level, and we also work at a regional level through a programme called Climate Ready Clyde. This is a picture from a community event that we ran, and we're going to try and do more of events like this. We've got loads of community members in the room, we've got lots of local authorities in the room, and just kind of looking at how do we sort of collaborate at that regional level. So any ideas that you have would be brilliant for that. So please come and talk to me afterwards. Can we go to the next one? Thank you. So you might have seen this already. This is a graphic taken from the global climate stripes, but I sort of extracted that for a Scotland level, just so you can see kind of similar patterns. The blue years are colder than average, and the red years are hotter than average. So sort of from about the 1980s onwards, you can see these big red bars being clustered together, which means year on year we're having suffering these kind of more increase in temperatures, and unfortunately with an increase in heat, it also leads to a bit more climate instability. So we're seeing sort of more of those as extreme weather events happening locally. I just wanted to touch on climate risk and climate impacts, because I love a bit of jargon busting. So climate risk is more of a likelihood or probability that climate impacts will happen. So it doesn't necessarily mean that these impacts will happen, it's just a probability that these things might happen. And climate impacts is what we see playing out in the ground, like in people's lives, what people are experiencing, what places are experiencing as well. And usually we see them as extreme weather events, and that's going to be happening more and more locally. So just to summarise sort of high-level things we might expect to see, the winters are going to get warmer and wetter, and we're going to have more intense rain as well. And you can see that our current drainage system, I don't know if you can see those photos very well, but our infrastructure and transport can't really cope with the level of rain that we're going to see. In the last few years, we've seen quite real impacts of flooding on people's lives. I'm sure many of you have seen those in the news and experienced them yourself. On the left is Bowling train station, which this is where the train tracks are. It's turned into a river. And people were joking about taking a kayak to work, but that might be happening in the future. And then, there's headlines like this where people become trapped in their own homes because of the flooding, and that's, people can get stranded, and it's very, very difficult for vulnerable people. So our summers are going to get hotter and drier, and I'm sure loads of people are looking forward to that. But the problem with that is that the more heat there is, the more risk there is of fire. And that is a wildfire in Skye. But the wildfires and fires are not going to be limited to rural areas. We'll also see them in more urban areas too. And other risks include sort of water shortages, drought, and more people suffering and dying because of extreme heat. So the last one I want to talk about is rising sea levels, because you wouldn't think that affects us, but because we're all on an estuary here, anything that comes from the sea will impact us downstream. And storm surges at the coast can cause quite physical damage. They can breach the seawalls, but they also cause damage to our roads and our houses. And like I said, downstream flooding impacts as well. Also, a sort of secondary effect is that people living by water might have their insurance go up as a result, and people might struggle to pay insurance on their houses. I wanted to just summarise the different types of climate action we can look at taking. So we really want to help limit the risk and impacts of climate change. Mitigation action focuses on reducing greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change. But climate adaptation is more around the kind of actions that help us cope with the impacts of climate change that are going to come. And there's some in the middle that are both types of action. And when we talk to policymakers, we really want to look at how do people do both of that actions together and integrate them both into any climate action plans, because that's really important. So just to remind everybody again, Adaptation Scotland provides advice and support to help Scotland as a whole be prepared and resilient to the impacts of climate change. And I've got the website there to find out more about that as well. And touched on Climate Ready Clyde already. So we've got 12 members. One of them is Renfrewshire Council. And again, we work with local councils, communities and Scottish Government to look at action at that regional level. And you can find out more on the website there. Great. I just wanted to touch on this because through Climate Ready Clyde, we also carried out a risk and opportunity assessment for the region, and that identified sort of the top themes where we'd want to see more action being taken to help sort of that regional resilience. And I've got the link there to the whole assessment, which you can have a read later on. So as part of the Adaptation Scotland programme, we created a Climate Ready Places resource, which has graphics like this, and there's 6 types of place in there, and we wanted to show places before and after adaptation action so people could get a sense of what we could do locally. So really what we want to do is transform an unadapted sort of town centre like this into an adapted place like this. So you can sort of see more of an increase of green areas, better drainage system, and there's a bit more information on the next slide about the types of actions, and you can have a look at these afterwards. So we kind of thinking about these issues and addressing these things for people and by people. So we want to make sure that when we're looking at actions, we want everyone to be included in that local decision making. And I just wanted to sort of touch on the climate vulnerability side of things. So you probably all know that social and economic factors can affect how people are impacted by climate change. These are things like age, gender, ethnicity, housing, tenure. And we just need to make sure that the actions that we take don't increase the vulnerability of those people or worsen existing inequalities as well. I just want to show you this. This is a map produced by Climate Ready Clyde, and this highlights places in the Glasgow City region with a higher social vulnerability, but also might suffer higher risk of flooding and overheating in the future. So the blue areas are where flooding is more likely to occur, and the red areas are more where overheating is likely to occur. And this is zoomed out, but you can have a look at the map and zoom in on places in Renfrewshire and have a look. We've already seen local councils in Climate Ready Clyde use this data to make decisions on prioritising their limited resources to people that really need it. I just wanted to mention a project called Creative Climate Futures, which is actually using the data from the map. We're supporting local action in vulnerable neighbourhoods in Glasgow, so we're trying to integrate that climate justice approach and also creative approaches, where we're working with embedded artists in those neighbourhoods to deliver a climate-ready vision for a future place. And we can find out more about this on the Sniffer website too. Cool. So through all of our work, really, we're looking at transformational climate adaptation, and that is not just doing things differently, but doing completely different things. And that could involve things like changing the power dynamics, making data accessible to people, and making sure that we're addressing inequality and making sure people thrive under a changing climate. And we're not trying to sort of repair broken stepping stones. We kind of really want to build a whole new bridge. We want a whole different way of doing things so that everybody can access the future. So I just want to show you quickly some resources that we have on our website. This is a recent one we produced, the Adaptation Route Map for Communities, which shows practical adaptation action that people can take that can also help address those inequalities. So that's available online in the Adaptation Scotland website, and there's plenty of other resources as well. And then my last slide, I just wanted to get you to think about some questions for yourself and how climate vulnerability might impact you and people that you know. So thinking about what does climate vulnerability mean to you and who is most vulnerable that you know or in your community, and also how can we act to reduce those inequalities together and individually as well.